Welcome, everyone, to a story that will pull you deep beneath the surface of an ordinary suburban backyard. This is a tale so bizarre, so unbelievable, you'll question everything you think you know. It all started on a quiet, unassuming Sunday morning. A man named David Carter decided to do a little yard work, never imagining that this simple act would unearth one of the most baffling discoveries of our time. For years, David's backyard was the picture of tranquility, a place for barbecues, for his kids to play, completely and utterly unremarkable. But then he noticed something odd. Near his old, weathered wooden shed, a patch of ground had become strangely soft. Every time it rained, this spot seemed to sink just a little bit deeper, creating a small, curious depression in the otherwise perfect lawn. At first, he ignored it. Maybe it was a drainage issue or settling soil. But the patch kept sinking, and his curiosity grew into an obsession he couldn't shake. Finally, he decided he had to know what was down there. Grabbing his trusty shovel, he began to dig, completely unaware that he was about to peel back the layers of reality itself, opening a gateway to something ancient, something that had been deliberately forgotten. But before we dig any deeper into this mystery, you need to stick with us until the very end. I promise you, what happens next will leave you absolutely speechless and questioning the very ground you stand on. So there was David, shovel in hand, breaking through the topsoil. The digging was easy at first, the earth soft and yielding. But as he dug deeper, about 3 feet down, his shovel struck something hard. A loud metallic asterisk, clang asterisk echoed through the quiet yard, a sound that didn't belong there. It wasn't a rock. It was something manufactured, something deliberate. His heart began to pound a little faster. He dropped to his knees and started clearing away the dirt with his hands. Slowly, an object began to emerge from the soil. It was a massive, rusted metal lid, circular and heavy. And what made his blood run cold were the strange, unfamiliar symbols etched all over its surface. They weren't from any language he recognized. They looked ancient, almost alien. This was no water main cover. It was something else entirely. The lid was far too heavy for one person to move. He called his neighbor, Tom, a retired mechanic who was always up for a good puzzle. Together, with grunts and sheer determination, they wedged their shovels under the edge and heaved. With a groan of rusted metal, the lid finally tilted open, revealing not a pipe or a tank, but a gaping black void. A dark, spiral staircase descended into the earth, disappearing into absolute darkness. The air that rose from the opening was stale and cold, carrying a scent of damp earth and something else, something ancient and metallic. What would you do? Would you turn back? Or would your curiosity force you to go down? For David and Tom, there was no choice. They had to know what was at the bottom of those stairs. Armed with nothing but their cell phone flashlights, they took their first tentative steps into the unknown. The stone steps were slick with moisture, and the circular walls of the shaft were unnervingly close. As their trembling beams of light danced across the stone, they saw something that made them stop dead in their tracks. The walls were covered in carvings, thousands of them. Eyes wide and staring seemed to follow their every move, and hands, ancient hands with too many fingers, were carved reaching out from the stone as if trying to grab them. The air grew colder, heavier with each step they took. The silence was deafening, broken only by their own ragged breaths and the dripping of water somewhere in the darkness below. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the bottom. The staircase opened into a small, perfectly circular chamber carved from the same dark stone. In the center of the room stood a stone pedestal, and resting upon it was a heavy, ornate box, bound in thick, rusty chains. The box itself seemed to hum with a strange energy. Using a rock, they managed to break the ancient lock. With trembling hands, they lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like dried leaves, were several golden scrolls. They were impossibly well preserved. As they carefully unrolled one, their flashlights illuminated inscriptions that were both beautiful and terrifying. The symbols were the same as the ones on the lid outside, but this time they could decipher a few words that made no logical sense. Before the great flood, suddenly the very air in the chamber began to vibrate. A low, powerful hum filled their ears, growing louder and louder. The flashlights on their phones began to flicker wildly, and then the ground itself started to shake. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and the stone walls around them seemed to groan, as if the earth itself was waking up. Panic set in. This wasn't a discovery. It was a tomb, and it was alive. They scrambled back up the spiral staircase, tripping and stumbling in the dark, the horrifying hum chasing them from below. They burst out into the sunlight, gasping for air, their hearts hammering against their ribs. They slammed the heavy lid shut, their minds reeling from what they had just seen. The next morning, shaken but determined to get answers, David called the local authorities. He tried to explain what he had found: the lid, the stairs, the chamber, the scrolls. They thought he was crazy, of course, but they sent a team to investigate anyway. When the officers arrived, however, they found nothing. The hole was gone. The ground where David had dug was perfectly flat, covered with fresh, undisturbed sod. There was no sign of a metal lid, no soft patch of dirt, no evidence that anything had ever happened. It was as if the earth had swallowed its own secret, healing the scar he had made. The police left, convinced it was a prank. But the story doesn't end there. A few days later, two men in dark, unmarked suits appeared at David's door. They didn't introduce themselves or show any identification. They were from a government agency he'd never heard of. They knew everything. They told him in no uncertain terms that what he saw was a matter of national security. He was to forget everything, tell no one, and never, ever dig in his backyard again. They then sealed off the entire area around the old shed, declaring it an environmental hazard zone. To this day, the area remains fenced off. David Carter moved away a year later, haunted by what he had found and what he was forced to forget. But some of the old neighbors say that on quiet, moonless nights, if you listen closely, you can still hear a faint, metallic echo rising from that patch of ground. It's a rhythmic, clanging sound, as if something ancient, something powerful, is still breathing, still waiting, just beneath the surface. So what did David really find? The entrance to a lost civilization that existed before recorded history? An ancient prison for something so terrifying it had to be buried and forgotten? Or was it something far beyond our comprehension? The truth, it seems, may have been buried forever. What do you think is hiding under our feet? Let me know in the comments below. And if you love mysteries that challenge reality, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because our next story might just be hiding right under your own home. Thanks for watching.